Summer 1944. The rail tracks of Auschwitz-Birkenau grind to a halt beside a sea of barbed wire and smoke. Across Nazi-occupied Europe, a machinery of extermination is in full motion, designed by bureaucrats, enforced by soldiers, and studied by doctors who turned human life into data. Amid this vast system, one obsession stands out: Josef Mengele's hunt for twins, the perfect subjects for his ruthless experiments on heredity and race. From a quiet Transylvanian village come two identical sisters, Eva and Miriam Mozes, 10 years old, separated from their family in a single shouted command. What happened next would test the limits of courage, love, and the human will to live. And to understand how their world collapsed, we start before the war, at home on the Mozes family farm.
Eva and Miriam Mozes entered the world on January 31, 1934, in the small village of Auschwitz, located in the Transylvania region. Born into a Jewish family, the twins were so remarkably identical that their parents had to make them wear name tags to tell them apart. Their mother often dressed them in matching outfits to emphasize their connection, and the girls delighted in using their similarity to play tricks on neighbors and family members, much to their father's exasperation. Despite their identical appearance, the sisters possessed distinctly different personalities. Eva, who would later write an autobiography detailing their experiences, was intelligent, brave, and strong-spirited. Miriam, by contrast, exhibited a gentler, more modest temperament. These complementary natures would prove crucial to their survival in the years to come. The Mozes family operated a substantial farm in Auschwitz, owning thousands of acres where they cultivated potatoes, beans, corn, and wheat. Their livestock included cows and sheep, from which they produced cheese and milk for local markets. A large vineyard on the property yielded grapes for the family's own wine production. By the standards of rural Transylvania in the 1930s, they lived comfortably, integrated into the rhythms of agricultural life that had sustained Jewish communities in the region for generations. The twins' mother maintained an optimistic outlook, even as disturbing news began filtering in from beyond their village. Reports circulated about Jews being forcibly relocated to labor camps, about the creation of ghettos in European cities, about the implementation of increasingly severe restrictions on Jewish life. Friends and relatives suggested emigrating to America or Palestine, where safety might be found. The Mozes family chose to stay, believing that anti-Semitism would not reach their rural community, that the storm would pass them by. That belief would prove tragically mistaken.
The summer of 1940 marked the beginning of the end for Jewish life in northern Transylvania. Following the Second Vienna Award, Adolf Hitler transferred control of the region to Hungary, which had aligned itself with Nazi Germany under the leadership of Regent Miklos Horthy. The Hungarian government swiftly implemented Nazi racial policies, beginning the systematic persecution of its Jewish population. When Hungarian soldiers entered ports, local residents received orders to welcome the army that now held authority over their lives. Initially, the occupation seemed bearable. No immediate persecutions occurred, and even as anti-Semitic sentiment grew more visible in the region, the Mozes family remained unmolested. For nearly 4 years they maintained their farm and their routines, perhaps daring to hope that they would escape the fate befalling Jews elsewhere in occupied Europe. That fragile hope shattered in 1944. The Mozes family received deportation orders. Along with other Jewish families from the region, they were transported to Czechoslovakia and confined in a Jewish ghetto. The conditions were harsh, overcrowded, and frightening, but the family remained together. That unity would last only until their transfer to Auschwitz later that year. The journey to Auschwitz took 4 days. The family traveled in a cattle car, pressed together with dozens of other deportees in a space designed for livestock. The car had no seats, no toilet facilities, minimal ventilation. Children cried, adults prayed or fell into stunned silence, and the train rolled inexorably toward its destination. When the doors finally opened at the Auschwitz-Birkenau arrival platform, SS officers began the selection process that would determine who lived and who died. An SS officer questioned the twins' mother about whether the girls were twins. Upon receiving confirmation, guards immediately separated Eva and Miriam from the rest of their family. The 10-year-old sisters reached toward their mother as SS men pulled them away. Their mother stretched her arms toward them, her face twisted in anguish. The girls never saw their mother, father, or their 2 older sisters again. The family members were sent directly to the killing facilities. For Eva and Miriam, this moment of separation would haunt them for the rest of their lives. They never had the chance to say goodbye.
Upon arrival at Auschwitz, Eva and Miriam entered a world that existed outside the bounds of human morality or compassion. They were assigned to the special barracks where Mengele conducted his research on twins. At 10 years old, they became subjects in experiments designed to advance Nazi theories of racial biology and heredity. Josef Mengele tut an unusual figure in the camp. Tall, dark-haired, and impeccably dressed in his SS uniform, he would arrive at the twins' barracks with candy and occasionally play with the younger children. To the smallest inmates, those aged 5 to 7, he appeared not as a monster, but as a kind uncle figure. The children lacked the experience or perspective to understand the true nature of the man who smiled at them while conducting experiments that often proved fatal. The barracks that housed the twins differed from other sections of the camp. Mengele wanted his research subjects alive and relatively healthy, at least until the experiments killed them. The children received slightly better rations than other prisoners and were not subjected to the random brutality that characterized daily life in other parts of Auschwitz. This created a surreal environment where the younger children, protected by their innocence, could not fully grasp the horror of their situation. Eva, older and more aware than the youngest children, understood more clearly the nature of their predicament. In her autobiography, she described witnessing Mengele's experimental subjects being brought back to the barracks. One incident seared itself into her memory. 2 twins, a boy and girl, whom Mengele had surgically joined together, attempting to create conjoined twins. He had connected their blood vessels and organs through their backs. The children screamed in agony day and night. Within 3 days, gangrene set in, and both died. Mengele pursued multiple lines of research simultaneously. He conducted experiments on the effects of disease, testing how different pathogens affected twins. He performed surgeries without anesthesia, observing how subjects reacted to pain and trauma. He castrated boys and sterilized women, studying the effectiveness of different sterilization techniques. He injected chemicals into children's eyes, attempting to change eye color. He amputated limbs, transplanted organs, and conducted countless other procedures that served no medical purpose beyond satisfying his curiosity or advancing his theories about racial biology. The experiments often came in pairs. Mengele would infect one twin with the disease or subject one to a procedure, then observe whether the other twin, living in the same barracks, developed similar symptoms. This approach reflected his interest in the nature versus nurture question and the degree to which genetics determined human development and disease susceptibility. When one twin died, he would immediately kill the other and perform comparative autopsies, examining how their organs and tissues differed.
One day, without warning or explanation, Eva received an injection. Within hours, her arm erupted in a terrible rash, and a deadly fever consumed her body. Mengele examined her briefly, his face showing no emotion. He made a quiet notation in his records. "Too bad, she's nearly a corpse. She'll be dead in 2 weeks." For Eva, those words carried a double meaning. She understood that if she died, Mengele would kill Miriam to complete his experimental protocol. Her sister's survival depended entirely on her own. This realization gave Eva a determination that transcended her 10-year-old body's capacity to fight the disease ravaging her system. The fever climbed higher. Eva's consciousness drifted in and out. Her body burned while the January cold permeated the poorly heated barracks. Desperate for water, she would crawl across the barracks' freezing floor to reach the single tap that provided brownish, contaminated water. Each journey across those few meters felt like miles. Her arms could barely support her weight. Her vision swam, and her fever-addled mind struggled to remember why she needed to keep moving, keep drinking, keep breathing. The other children in the barracks watched her deteriorate. Some whispered that she would die soon. Eva herself felt death approaching, felt her body beginning to surrender to whatever pathogen Mengele had introduced into her bloodstream. But each time she considered giving up, she thought of Miriam. Her sister, still healthy, still whole, would die the moment Eva stopped breathing. This knowledge sustained her when her body wanted to quit. Somehow, against medical probability and Mengele's expectations, Eva survived. Her fever broke after 2 weeks. The rash faded. Her strength slowly returned. She had defeated whatever disease Mengele had infected her with through sheer force of will and an unbreakable determination to protect her sister. Love had accomplished what medicine could not. Mengele noted Eva's recovery in his records, but showed no particular interest in understanding how she had survived. He had other subjects, other experiments. The twins who lived were anomalies in his data, nothing more.
On January 27, 1945, Soviet soldiers of the 60th Army of the First Ukrainian Front reached Auschwitz. The SS had begun evacuating the camp days earlier, forcing thousands of prisoners on death marches westward. Mengele fled, taking his research notes with him. He would escape justice, living in South America under various aliases until his death by drowning in Brazil in 1979. The Soviet soldiers who entered Auschwitz found approximately 7,000 prisoners still alive, too weak to have been included in the evacuation. Among them were Eva and Miriam Mozes, twin sisters who had survived 10 months in the Angel of Death's laboratory. They were emaciated, traumatized, and orphaned, but they were alive. The immediate aftermath of liberation brought new challenges. The girls had no home to return to, no parents to care for them, no certainty about their future. The Soviet military and Red Cross workers provided basic care and began the process of identifying survivors and attempting to reunite families. For the Moses twins, there would be no reunion. Their entire family had perished in the camp. Eventually, the sisters were returned to Romania, where a Catholic convent took them in. The nuns provided shelter, food, and education, helping the traumatized girls begin to rebuild some sense of normalcy. The sisters remained in the convent's care for several years, learning to live in a world without barbed wire, without fear, without Mengele. In keeping with their father's dream, Eva and Miriam eventually emigrated to Israel. The new state, established in 1948, represented a homeland for Jewish survivors seeking to escape the ruins of European Jewish life. The twins arrived as teenagers, carrying with them memories of a childhood that no child should experience.
Eva Mozes proved as resilient in peacetime as she had been in Auschwitz. She pursued education with determination, eventually moving to the United States, where she studied and established a career as a real estate agent. In 1960, she married Michael Kor,
and together they built a family, raising 2 children, Alex and Rina. Eva worked to create the normal life that had been stolen from her in childhood. She attended school plays, celebrated birthdays, worried about ordinary parental concerns. Yet the past never fully released its hold. Miriam married as well and continued living in Israel. The sisters remained close, speaking regularly despite the distance between them. But the legacy of Mengele's experiments continued to exact a toll. The experimental injections, diseases, and procedures Miriam had endured in Auschwitz had severely damaged her kidneys. As she aged, the damage worsened. By the early 1980s, her kidney function had deteriorated to the point that she required a transplant. Eva donated one of her kidneys to her sister without hesitation. The surgery succeeded, giving Miriam several more years of relatively healthy life. But the damage from the experiments ran too deep. Miriam's body, weakened by childhood trauma and malnutrition, struggled to maintain the transplanted kidney. Her health declined gradually, but inexorably. On June 6, 1993, Miriam Mozes died at the age of 59. The experiments Josef Mengele had conducted nearly 50 years earlier had finally claimed their delayed victim.
Miriam's death transformed Eva's relationship with her past. The grief of losing her twin, her closest companion since birth, the person who had shared every trauma and every triumph, drove Eva to confront the unresolved anger and pain she had carried for decades. She decided to travel to Germany, to speak publicly about the atrocities committed in the camps, and to make a declaration that would shock many in the survivor community. Eva announced that she had decided to forgive all those responsible for the Holocaust. Not to excuse, not to forget, but to forgive. She sought out Hans Munch, a Nazi doctor who had worked at Auschwitz. Unlike Mengele, Munch had survived the war and lived openly in Germany. Eva traveled to meet him, and in a powerful encounter, she offered him her forgiveness face to face. Munch, who had testified at the Nuremberg trials about what he witnessed at Auschwitz, accepted her forgiveness with visible emotion. Eva's decision to forgive generated controversy among Holocaust survivors and their families. Some saw it as a profound act of personal liberation. Others viewed it as inappropriate, arguing that she had no right to forgive crimes committed against others, or that forgiveness dishonored those who died. Eva addressed these criticisms directly. She explained that her forgiveness was personal, not universal. She forgave to free herself from the burden of hatred, to reclaim power over her own emotional life. Mengele and the Nazi regime had controlled her childhood. She refused to let them control her adult life through perpetual anger. This philosophy of personal forgiveness became central to Eva's mission in her later years. She traveled extensively, speaking at schools, universities, and Holocaust education centers. She emphasized that forgiveness was not about the perpetrator, but about the victim's choice to move forward without being consumed by rage.
In 1995, Eva founded the Candles, Holocaust Museum and Education Center in Terre Haute, Indiana. Candles stood for Children of Auschwitz Nazi Deadly Lab Experiments Survivors. The museum was dedicated to telling the story of the twin experiments and educating future generations about the Holocaust. It housed artifacts, photographs, and testimonies from survivors of Mengele's experiments, along with broader educational materials about the Holocaust and genocide prevention. The museum faced challenges from the outset. It operated on a modest budget, staffed largely by volunteers, and struggled to attract visitors in a small Midwestern city far from major population centers. In 2003, disaster struck when an arsonist destroyed the museum building. The perpetrator, never identified, burned the facility to the ground, destroying irreplaceable artifacts and exhibits. Eva, then in her late 60s, could have viewed this as the final defeat, the ultimate silencing of survivor testimony. Instead, she rebuilt. Within 2 years, a new candles museum opened in Terre Haute. Eva threw herself into fundraising, speaking engagements, and outreach with renewed energy. The museum expanded its educational programs, developing curricula for schools and training programs for teachers. Eva became a sought-after speaker, traveling across the United States and internationally to share her story. Each year, Eva organized a trip back to Auschwitz, leading groups of students, teachers, and other visitors through the camp where she had nearly died. She walked them through the arrival platform where she was separated from her family, showed them the barracks where she lived, explained the camp's layout and operation. She answered questions, no matter how difficult, sharing details of experiences that most people could barely imagine. These annual pilgrimages became central to her educational mission, transforming Auschwitz from an abstraction into a concrete place where specific crimes occurred against specific human beings.
Eva Mozes Corps continued her educational work into her 80s, showing no signs of slowing down. She published her autobiography, gave countless interviews, and maintained an active schedule of speaking engagements. Her energy seemed inexhaustible, driven by a sense of mission that transcended personal comfort. She believed that as long as survivors remained alive to testify, the world had an obligation to listen. On July 4, 2019, Eva was in Krakow, Poland, leading one of her annual educational trips to Auschwitz. At 85 years old, she was still walking groups through the camp, still answering questions, still bearing witness. That morning, she did not wake up. She died peacefully in her sleep, her long life of testimony finally complete. The news of her death resonated across the international community. Holocaust educators, survivors, students, and human rights advocates mourned the loss of a remarkable voice. Tributes poured in from around the world, acknowledging not just her survival, but her decades of work to ensure that the lessons of the Holocaust would not be forgotten. The Candles Museum announced that it would continue its mission, honoring Eva's legacy by maintaining the educational programs she had built. Eva and Miriam's journey exposes the perversion of medicine under Nazism and the resilience that can outlast terror. Eva's survival to protect her sister, Miriam's long fight with damaged health, and Eva's later choice to forgive are not contradictions, but the hard geometry of trauma and agency. The Candles Museum and Eva's annual returns to Auschwitz turned memory into action, teaching that atrocity grows when ordinary people look away. Never forget is not a slogan, but a responsibility. Recognize dehumanization early and resist it. As survivor voices fade, their recorded testimony becomes our task to carry. We remember, we learn, and we pass their story on. If you found this documentary meaningful and want to help preserve the memory of these events, please subscribe to the channel.